So we wanted to take this opportunity from the get-go to ensure that we were able to incorporate Inuktitut philanthropy and our Inuit way of sharing. That looks different to most.
You're listening to Let's Imagine, an Imagine Canada podcast for everyone interested in social issues and the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Bruce McDonald. At Imagine Canada, we believe that by leveraging our national vantage point, building cross-sector relationships, and sharing and developing our knowledge base, we can advance social, economic, and environmental justice through our collective action. Join us as we dive deep into conversations that have big implications for the nonprofit and charitable sector here in Canada. A special thank you to our knowledge partner, Carter's Professional Corporation, and our supporting partner, Blackbaud. Together, let's imagine a stronger future. Today on the show, we are thrilled to welcome Danielle Gibbie, Executive Director, and Udlu Hanson, co-founding member of the first community foundation in Nunavut, Annauma Community Foundation. Community foundations are created to support local community needs using donated funds from a wide variety of sources. Every community foundation selects their own areas of focus and how the funds will be invested and distributed within that community. In Annauma's case, there are community-based action priority areas that are connected to the social, economic, and natural environment in Nunavut. Annauma works in unique ways, which we will explore with our guests today. So let's learn more about this organization, its mission, and the community it serves. Danielle, Udlu, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having us, Bruce.
Thank you.
Udlu, we'll start with you. As stated on your organization's website, Annauma's mission is to deliver funding and support that strengthens Inuit values, skills, and worldview in a manner that encourages lifelong learning and nurtures collaborative community relationships. As a founding member of the organization, a co-founding member, can you tell us about the origins of the organization, the meaning of the word Annauma, its story, why the idea of creating a community foundation in Nunavut came to be? We're really interested in how this all got started.
Thank you for asking. Thank you so much for having us on the show today. We're very excited to talk about Annauma Community Foundation. And maybe I'll just start on the actual name. You did a fantastic job in its pronunciation, but it's that Annauma is the short form. Annauma is the actual name, but we recognize the need to be able to have something that Southerners can say and remember. The root word of Annauma, or the root word of Annauma really is about surviving. And we have taken it a step further to actually want to be able to help organizations thrive. We want people in Nunavut to thrive. And so we were looking for a name that demonstrated that ability to help people do that. So not necessarily being the organization that focuses on survival or helping organizations thrive, but giving them the tools, the resources necessary to do it for themselves. It was a very thoughtful and deliberate process to find a name that was representative of what we wanted to do, what we envisioned doing, helping organizations do and people do. So we spoke with elders, we spoke with people within our community to ask them what they thought we should call ourselves. So I'm always happy to talk about the origins of the name. Now, as it relates to the actual origins of the organization, Nunavut only has 37 registered charities, where we have a very small charitable sector, and our charitable organizations are mostly made up of churches and daycares. There aren't that many granting foundations, or there's only actual 2 foundations, and we would be the granting foundation. So there was a very strong need, and it was very apparent to us that in order for us to be able to support in a charitable sense in Nunavut, we needed to find a way to bridge the North and the South. We needed a way to find ways for Southerners to help support Northern initiatives, to help support community initiatives. There was an obvious, and there is an obvious desire for Southerners to help. There just hasn't been the real charitable mediums or mechanisms for them to do that. And we're hoping that this organization will do that we can help bridge that not only the gap, but also bridge the north from the south. I think also I just want to touch on a little bit as to why we might have chosen it to be a community foundation, because there was many different ways that we could have structured ourselves. The Community Foundations of Canada came to Nunavut asking, there was a workshop, and they just asked if there was any desire or any interest at creating a community foundation. And that's, of course, when we jumped on the initiative. Just the fact that there would be an opportunity to create an organization that would be community-led. Nunavut has 25 communities, and Nunavut is still very community-oriented. Our communities are really only about between 65 and 80 at most years old, meaning Inuit were still quite nomadic 60, 70 years ago, and only became to live in communities about 60 or 70 years ago. So we still have a very strong sense of community, still very much ingrained in our culture. If you came to Nunavut, you'd see and you'd feel it. We still have community feasts. We still have Christmas games that go on for days, some of them even over 24 hours. We have communal hunts. So we're very community oriented. And so the Community Foundation just made sense.
Thank you. That's just wonderful to hear sort of the genesis or the origin story behind the concept for having a community foundation in Nunavut. So Danielle, we're going to turn to you now. With its approach to granting that is community-led and grassroots, the foundation has a unique way of doing things with a structure that differs from other community foundations. Can you tell us more about the consensus-based granting model of the foundation and the benefits of this approach compared to traditional philanthropy models?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So I think at its core, our approach to consensus-based granting really trusts that the organizations know the best solutions to the communities that they're serving. It's fundamentally shifting that power from those who have money to be making decisions and puts that power-making abilities into the hands of organizations that are serving their communities. So our consensus-based granting, we build cohorts that are working together on a common thematic area that align to our priorities. And these cohorts together collectively work together to come to consensus on the various initiatives or the projects they bring forward, the funding allocations, and even how they're going to be measuring and monitoring their projects. The first cohort we did was focused on Inuit children and youth, and we had 4 local organizations participate. And I naively thought that, it's very likely they will split the funding down the middle and each walk away with a grant the same size. And that's not what happened. And someone has shared this with me that I think is important to share here today, is that when Inuit are eating together at a community feast or a celebration, and say you're eating a piece of fish, you don't cut that fish into equal sized portions. People only take what they need. So when they're coming together on the funding allocations for their various initiatives, we actually see organizations saying, I can scale back my project. You should have more money. We've done this before. We know this takes a lot of money. You should have this amount. So it's very based on that equity mindset of making sure that everyone has what they need to do their work successfully. Another thing is that collaborative mindset for organizations to come together. You see this mindset shift in participants in the first couple of hours or so, from thinking they're coming into this room to just apply for their organization and get what they need, to realizing that as a group collectively, they're able to determine how this funding will be shaped. And we see organizations and the participants have a lot of pride and ownership in wanting to make sure that this funding allocation is going to have a maximum impact. So it's really about shifting the power dynamics. It reduces administration for grantees rather than writing long application forms. All of this work is done verbally in person. And it's also building their own peer network. So like I said, the organizations collectively decide on what they're going to monitor and report on their projects. And Annauma, as part of our reporting mechanisms, asks the organizations to set a date to reconvene. So they can come back 6 months later, a year later, that's up to them. And we create space for them to come together and share back, reflecting on their challenges, their successes, what they learned. And they're doing this as a peer group. So really learning and building and sharing from one another.
Danielle, I'm going to stay with you for a second on this. I'm very intrigued by this model. It's so interesting to hear what is really a fundamentally different approach. But the word consensus often conjures up different understandings. And sometimes you'll hear, or people will think that consensus is about universal agreement. I've heard others say consensus is about enough agreement to move forward. From your perspective, how is the foundation defining that term and acting on it?
Yes, thank you. So we actually have the participants of each cohort determine what consensus means to them and when they know that they've reached a decision together. And so this will look different for different groups that we bring together. Our first cohort landed on the statement of, I support this initiative, even though it might not be my preferred option. Whereas our most recent cohort, they really wanted to have ownership and pride in each of the ideas around the table. Someone shared that they want to be able to be excited about all of the projects and share that with their own communities. So consensus will look different for different groups. And again, that's in the participants for themselves to really determine when they know that they've come to a decision. I think it's also worth noting that, and even for myself as a newcomer to Nunavut, at first it seemed like this is a very new and novel approach to granting, but this is really rooted in traditional Inuit knowledge and societal values. So consensus-based decision-making and sharing are core values and are really reflective of Inuit culture.
That's a great point. And I should probably rephrase that question in a way that it's different for institutional funding, but clearly your point is it's a way of working that's been around for a long time. And I think it's just fascinating that the way it unfolds is both participant driven and it can change depending on the needs of the group. So fascinating. I'm sure our listeners are going to love this. Udlu, over to you with the next question. So last year, Annauma launched its inaugural $10 million Caring North campaign. So what are the priorities for this campaign that will benefit local communities?
The priorities for the Caring North campaign are the same as the priorities for the Annauma Community Foundation. We have 5 priorities. We have the Inuit children and youth priority, education and learning, arts and culture, community health and well-being, and community identified opportunities. These priorities were developed by speaking with community members and looking at what needs there are and really trying to provide a sense of what community needs are and where community support for community initiatives would likely be put toward. We weren't going to try and develop any flashy language or anything that didn't reflect the communities. The priorities really needed to reflect what the community priorities are. So we're planning to ensure that the support for the priorities will be led by the communities. So if there happens to be something that's perhaps a little more pressing and the communities have expressed a need to direct funds towards one priority over another, then we're willing to listen. We also have, as I mentioned, the community identified opportunities where if there is some sort of emergency, some sort of urgent need that the communities have identified, we have a priority where we can direct funds, direct support toward. I mean, there was the pandemic. We created this organization during the pandemic. We were all home doing this over Zoom. And so it was very evident that we needed to be flexible and reflect the needs of the communities in that way. So although 5 priorities sounds quite many, I will say that Nunavut our social indicators are not all that great. In terms of where they are in Canada, we do have the highest rates of poverty. We're in a housing crisis, and we do have a high degree of food insecurity. So all of these are priorities. Meeting the needs of communities, they are all priorities.
For sure. And I think one of the situations that funding organizations often find themselves in is that there's always more demand for support than there are usually resources with which to provide that support. So Danielle, we're going to come to you now. One of the philanthropic trends we've observed in recent years is the rise in popularity of donor-advised funds. A donor-advised fund is an account that a donor opens with a charity, a community foundation, or a financial institution. It allows donors to set aside funds at any time to give to nonprofits or charities later. By opening a donor-advised fund, donors demonstrate a commitment to supporting charitable causes in the long term. At Annauma, as a community foundation, you're going against the trend by not having donor-advised funds. Can you tell us about the rationale behind this decision?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I'll start, and then Udlu, please jump in if you want. But at its core, I think it's pretty simple in building on what Udlu was just saying of making sure Annauma's priority areas are reflective of community needs. We can't do that with donor-advised funds. So we welcome donors to choose one of our priority areas if they want, but we're strategically not having donor-advised funds because in order for us to respond and be reflective of the needs of our communities, we can't have donors telling us where to put money. And again, it goes back to that trust and trusting that our communities know the best solutions to the challenges they're facing.
Udlu, would you like to comment on this question?
Sure. I mean, we're more than happy to have that conversation with donors and supporters, if they were willing to look at, if they want to share with us where their priority is in terms of supporting community initiatives and show them how their perhaps request to direct funding toward a priority or another is a welcome conversation. What we didn't want to do is, again, trying to be as reflective as possible of the Inuit culture. If you drive around our communities, you're not going to see the Bob Hanson Park or the Mary Jane Community Center. It's not very typical for Inuit to be pointing out specific people. That's not a community-oriented type of thought, or definitely not a means or ways of sharing. When we created the foundation, we really didn't have a strong sense or a need, I believe, to replicate Southern ways, typical Southern philanthropic ways of sharing. We definitely had a very strong sense to do good by our communities. Like with our consensus-based granting, if they're in the driver's seat, then all the power to them. They can decide they should decide what's best for their communities. They know. And having donor-advised funds kind of takes that power away from them. It suggests something that we didn't think was a good fit. And every single decision we made, especially when we were creating those priorities, when we were creating more or less the sense that we want to give with Annauma Community Foundation, we always brought it back to the Inuit ways of sharing. What does that look like? What does it feel like? And Danielle gave an example of sharing. I gave some examples earlier as well, but we have to do our gut check. And our gut check would be, as you said in the very beginning, Bruce, about Inuit societal values and our worldview. So we wanted to take this opportunity from the get-go to ensure that we were able to incorporate Inuktitut philanthropy and our Inuit way of sharing. That looks different to most. It kind of brings it right back to its core roots of sharing. It brings it back to, why are people sharing in the first place? Why are they providing charitable funds? What do they want to see? What do they want to feel when they give? It's a sense of being able to share. So not only did we want Inuit to experience that, our communities to experience that from perhaps a receiving end, but also from where the sharing is initiated from, that it flows through right straight from donor to our community partners. It needs to feel like they have been empowered right from the get-go.
Thank you for that. And we're going to explore another difference, if you will, between how Annauma is functioning and how other foundations operate. And that relates to endowment funds, meaning a fund that's restricted and only the interest from the fund is spent, not the principal. It sort of seems atypical for many foundations, although we are starting to see maybe a shift in this traditional way of managing and distributing funds. If we think of, for example, the Ivy Foundation, which decided to wind down its endowment and give all of its money over the course of 5 years to address urgent, immediate climate change-related issues. And there's always this tension that we hear in the endowment discussion. This idea of addressing immediate needs is certainly a valid argument. And on the other hand, an endowment can help ensure the long-term sustainability of an organization. So maybe, Danielle, we'll start with you. What are the main considerations for your organization as it was thinking about not having an endowment?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. And I'll let Udlu speak to the origins of that. But I can maybe talk a little bit about what our funding model is, because we've intentionally chosen not to have an endowment. And so we have a 40-40-20 allocation model. So 40% of funds are for community granting to be spent over a 3-year period. 40% of those are put into long-term investments with the intention to return those funds to community granting. And then 20% is for sector development. And so that aligns with our organizational goal of helping to strengthen the nonprofit and charitable sector in Nunavut. So we have community granting, sector development, and long-term investments. And the idea is that those long-term investments will return to community granting and creating this continuous flow of money. So there is a focus on the immediate and now, and quite a significant amount, well over the 5% disbursement quota that foundations are required to. But we also are looking after the long-term mindset with 40% going to investments.
And Udlu, would you like to comment on this one as well?
Sure. Thank you. I guess it goes back to the same more or less question about donor advised funds and how we're not doing it the usual way or the Southern way. And I think one point of clarification is that we're not saying we'll never do it, that we won't ever see the need or the desire for an endowment fund. But what we do know, and what we did know when we created the organization, is that there's a real need now. Let's hope that this is the worst that Inuit will ever be. Those social indicators that I gave earlier, poverty, housing crisis, and food insecurity, just to name a few, our health indicators are all not where we want them to be. So to spend our time and energy right now in creating a fund that we're not to access for a number of years, or to be able to only portion off some of it in the next few years, it didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel, there is an urgent need now. There is a need to support organizations, communities, people now. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not as though we might not consider it in the future, but we thought, let's have some early wins. Let's demonstrate to the community how this is going to be driven by the communities and plan for the future. This, again, is really reflective, again, of how we like to think. We think that reflects our Inuit culture, sharing now, sharing with those that need it. To do philanthropy is embedded in Inuit principles, values, behaviors, and worldviews. So to say that we're going to take the help and support that we're receiving and put it away right now is, wouldn't be reflective. Inuit communities and community members have always depended on one another for food security and societal strength. As I mentioned earlier, we're only just settling into communities in the last generation. My mother was born in an igloo. We're still that closely related to having been traveling in camps together. And So this is a journey we're taking together in a philanthropic sense. Okay, so we're going to move together, and we're going to decide together when we think we need to save, when we need to spend, when what we need to spend it on. And we're only as strong as our weakest members of the community. So we're not going to thrive until we know that everybody has the tools and resources that they need. It's that communal means of preparedness and resourcefulness that still thrives today. But again, we're happy to have those conversations with donors and supporters in the South to explain what this means. We understand it's going against the grain. We know that it's very different for them, and it's conversations. It's learning from one another. It's to trust in one another that we think the communities know where these funds should go, where the support and sharing should go.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a question to both of you, and Udlu, we'll start with you this time. How do you envision Annauma evolving over time?
That's a great question. Earlier, when you asked about our priorities, I got pretty worked up about the priorities because there's so many. I neglected to mention the fact that another priority that we very much see, and it may not be listed as such, but something that we understand there to be a very strong need for, that's in building capacity within the charitable sector. That's in building capacity. That's in providing the means and empowering those in the communities to be able to share. So when I envision what I would love to see Annauma doing, not only is it sharing, but it's also, again, providing the tools necessary for others to be able to share.
So Danielle, same question to you in terms of, where you see the organization evolving.
I think, we're very early on in our granting. So we've only done 2 cohorts right now, and we are focused in Iqaluit and have plans over the next few years to expand to all 3 regions of Nunavut. So serving the entire territory. We are, however, with our community nominated award that's open to any charity and nonprofit based in Nunavut that is territory wide right now. But with our consensus granting cohorts, we're starting here, really learning from our community and adapting and evolving the model as we learn alongside our community and receive feedback from their experience. And I think that's, not only will we be serving the entire territory, but recognizing that what we do in one region might look and feel a little bit different in another region, being reflective of how that community works and what their needs are. Annauma, I see, is continuously learning and growing. So I hope to see the organization shift and evolve over time as our communities do as well, and the nonprofit sector does. Those challenges that they face today might look different in a few years. And so our work and the supports that we're giving them should be reflective of that. I do, as Udlu was sharing about supporting the nonprofit sector and charitable sector to thrive, I think that's a really incredible goal to have and so important because these organizations are the heartbeat of the territory. They are doing very important work around food insecurity, housing, poverty, social well-being, language revitalization. And these organizations, when you talk to them, everyone has dreams and visions of what they want to achieve and become, but they don't necessarily have the tools or supports to do that. So if we can play a small role in giving these organizations the tools they need to thrive, our entire territory will be stronger because of it.
So as we wrap up the podcast, I'm going to ask a question that we often ask guests who come on the show. What are you most optimistic about when thinking about your work and the philanthropic sector, in this case in Nunavut, more broadly? And Udlu, we'll start with you.
I am most optimistic of the reception that we've had. We knew there was a need. We knew the community would be receptive. We knew they knew there was a need and that they were very supportive, but we just didn't get, the sense of just how. It's ironic because when you ask us, what am I most optimistic about? It's as though you can flip that question on its head, and it's our communities we're providing optimism for our communities, and that, of course, is just amazing. There's so much hope. There's so much optimism from the South. We've had an incredible amount of optimism from the South and support from the South. And we envisioned it, we wanted it, but just to feel it and to see it playing out provides even more optimism. We always knew there was a strong desire from the South to bridge the North, but the bridge goes both ways. So for the Northerners to see that the Southerners are that optimistic to help, are that supportive, and really do want to play a role in seeing healthy communities and thriving communities, it just gives me goosebumps. I'm so optimistic about it, that relationship between the North and the South is only going to continue, and we'll find ways to continue to support one another. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Danielle, same question about optimism.
Yeah, I think in terms of the philanthropic sector more broadly, I am, Annauma's model from how we're granting to support our communities, how we're receiving money from our donors and our partners is very refreshing. I think the philanthropic sector is rooted in structural powers that don't always serve communities in the ways intended and tend to be very donor-centric. So this model is a shift to really being community-centric and community-led. And I think that hopefully we can serve as a model for other organizations, or for other organizations to think about the way that they're doing things, and is there a way that we can serve our community better? That's what's really exciting for me, and also definitely the hope and optimism and abundance that we can bring to our community here. When Udlu mentioned earlier that we are the only grant-making foundation in Nunavut, we wear hats as both a charitable organization and a granting organization, which isn't the norm for Nunavut. So I think our community is still getting used to the idea that we're giving out funding, but we're also a charitable organization. And so I hope that we can continue providing funding and supports and networks to really support these organizations to thrive.
Well, Udlu, Danielle, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. As I listen to both of you, it strikes me that this conversation was centered on a structure, a construct in terms of how public good or public benefit can be achieved. And we think about that in a certain way. And I think what you've invited us to do is to think about a way that is actually rooted in culture and history and community, that while the structure may, in a sense, notionally be the same, the operation of that can have many different ways of working based on those who are participating and those who are operating it. And it sounds so interesting. We're very much looking forward to following the success of the organization in the future. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Imagine podcast. For full show notes and to subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss an episode, please visit our website, www.imaginecanada.ca. Also, if you really like this episode, we invite you to leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, as this helps other people discover us and engage in these conversations. And again, thanks to our sponsors, Carter's Professional Corporation and Blackbot, for supporting our podcast.